The scent of truffle oil and aged wine greeted Alberto Zanardi as he stepped into La Pergola, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with practiced authority. The restaurant hushed imperceptibly at his arrival, not silence, but a subtle recalibration of energy that acknowledged power when it walked through the door. Mr. Zanardi, Antonio the manager, appeared within seconds, his smile professional but his eyes careful. "Your table is ready." Alberto nodded, following the man through the dimly lit dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast amber light across white tablecloths and the soft murmur of conversation blended with Vivaldi drifting from hidden speakers. This was his monthly ritual, a Tuesday afternoon meeting that kept certain business relationships well oiled. La Pergola offered discretion, excellent food, and the kind of atmosphere where men like Alberto could discuss matters that required privacy. Vincent, his bodyguard, peeled away to take position near the entrance while Alberto was escorted to the VIP section, a series of semi-private booths separated by frosted glass partitions that allowed shadows and shapes but protected conversations. The translucent barriers created an illusion of intimacy while maintaining visibility, architectural choice that appealed to men who needed to see danger coming. Alberto settled into the burgundy leather booth, adjusting his Armani suit jacket. At 47, he carried his authority like a second skin, sharp cheekbones, dark hair threaded with distinguished silver, and eyes that had witnessed too much to ever be truly soft. But today, those eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with business. 3 years. 3 years since Francesca's last breath, and still every Tuesday felt like excavating old wounds. "Your usual aperitif, Mr. Zanardi?" Antonio hovered nearby. "Yes, please." As the manager retreated, Alberto's gaze drifted across the restaurant. Tuesday afternoons were quieter. Businessmen conducting deals, wealthy retirees enjoying long lunches, the occasional couple marking an anniversary. His attention snagged on movement near the bar. That woman. The waitress from his last visit. Gina, he remembered. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, moving through her section with efficient grace. She'd served him 3 weeks ago, attentive without being intrusive, professional enough to read when he wanted silence. She'd noticed his water glass needed refilling before he'd touched the bottom, had brought his espresso exactly as he preferred it without asking. Good service was rare, observant service was rarer still. Chapter 1. Antonio returned with his Negroni, and Alberto forced his attention to the reason he was here. His associate would arrive in 20 minutes. Until then, he had reports to review on his phone, numbers that told stories of shipments and percentages, and the careful mathematics of an empire built on things people pretended didn't exist. But concentration fractured when the opening notes of "You Are the Reason" began to play. Alberto's hand froze halfway to his glass. Francesca's song, the one she'd played endlessly during those last months, lying in her hospital bed with those useless chemo drugs dripping into her veins. "I'd climb every mountain and swim every ocean just to be with you and fix what I have broken." She'd whispered the lyrics when the pain got bad, when the medication made her float somewhere between consciousness and dreams. "This one makes me feel brave, Papa," she'd said once, her bald head resting against his shoulder. "Like even broken things can be beautiful." Alberto's jaw tightened. He reached for his drink, needing the bitter bite of Campari to ground him, when movement through the frosted glass caught his eye. Gina stood near the bar, her back to the dining room, and even through the translucent partition, Alberto could see her shoulders shaking. She raised one hand to her face, wiping tears, he realized. Her other hand clutched at the bar's edge as though it was the only thing keeping her upright. The music swelled. "Just to be with you and fix what I have broken." Gina reached for a napkin from the bar, pressing it to her eyes. Her whole body curved inward, a posture Alberto recognized with sharp clarity. Someone trying to fold themselves small enough that the grief couldn't find them. It never worked. Grief always found you. She straightened suddenly, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. Her professional mask slid back into place with visible effort, but her hands trembled as she smoothed her apron. She disappeared toward what Alberto assumed were the restrooms, probably to compose herself properly. Something twisted in his chest, recognition perhaps, or memory. The countless times he'd locked himself in his study, whiskey in hand, pretending the burning in his eyes was from the alcohol and not from the photographs of a daughter who'd never grow older than 17. When his associate arrived 15 minutes later, Alberto conducted their business with his usual precision. They discussed shipments, percentages, problems that needed solving. But his attention kept drifting to that frosted glass, to the space where he'd watched a stranger's sorrow mirror his own. The meeting concluded. His associate left. Alberto should have left too. Instead, he caught Vincent's attention with a subtle gesture. His bodyguard approached the booth with the wary expression of a man who'd learned to read his employer's moods. "Vincent." Alberto's voice was quiet. "The waitress from last time, Gina. Bring her here." Vincent's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise he'd permit himself. "Boss? You heard me. Right away." Alberto watched Vincent approach Antonio, saw the brief conversation, the manager's glance toward the kitchen. This was unusual, Alberto knew. He didn't socialize with staff. He barely spoke to anyone beyond what business required. Since Francesca died, he'd become a ghost in his own life, present but not participating, breathing but not living. So why was he doing this? Because that song had played, and through frosted glass he'd seen someone else drowning. Because grief recognized grief, the way predators recognized prey. Because for 3 years he'd carried this weight alone, and watching someone else carry theirs had cracked something in his carefully maintained armor. Gina appeared at the entrance to the VIP section, Antonio hovering behind her. She looked terrified. Her face had been washed, makeup repaired, but her eyes were still red-rimmed. She smoothed her apron with shaking hands. "Mr. Zanardi!" Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Antonio said you wanted to see me. If there was a problem with your service, I sincerely apologize." There was no problem. Alberto gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit, please." Gina glanced back at Antonio, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She perched on the edge of the leather booth like a bird ready to take flight, her spine rigid. "I saw you crying," Alberto said simply. The color drained from Gina's face. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Zanardi. I didn't mean to. I thought the partition. No one was supposed to see. I would never let my personal issues affect my work." "I apologize for ruining your lunch. You didn't ruin anything." Alberto leaned back, studying her. Up close, he could see the careful way she held herself together, the architecture of composure built over a foundation of devastation. He knew that construction intimately. "But I see pain in your eyes, my dear. Do you want to talk about it?" "It's nothing, really." The lie came automatically, smoothly. "Just a difficult day. I apologize for the unprofessional display. It won't happen again. I know the look of grief." Alberto's voice softened in a way it rarely did anymore. "I've worn it myself." Something in Gina's carefully constructed facade cracked. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears she desperately tried to blink away. "I should get back to work. I have tables." "Antonio." Alberto didn't raise his voice, but the manager appeared instantly. "Gina needs a break. 30 minutes." "Of course, Mr. Zanardi." Antonio's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "Take your time, Gina. Maria can cover your section." When Antonio retreated, Gina sat frozen, staring at her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched, filled only with the distant clink of silverware and the murmur of other diners. "Today would have been her 9th birthday," Gina whispered finally, her voice so low Alberto had to lean forward to hear. "My daughter, Sophia." The name landed between them like a prayer. She was hit by a car 5 months ago, coming home from Riverton Elementary. It was a Tuesday, just like today. Beautiful weather. She had a spelling test that morning, got 100%. She was so proud. Gina's voice cracked. "The driver didn't stop. They never found who did it. My baby was just gone." Lying on the sidewalk 3 blocks from home while I was making her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with the little elbow noodles. She liked them better than the shell ones. Alberto said nothing. He'd learned that grief didn't need commentary. It needed witness. That song that was playing earlier. Gina pressed her fingers against her eyes. It was Sophia's favorite. She'd dance around our apartment singing it, making up her own dance moves. She'd beg me to play it just one more time, Mama. Please, just one more time. And I'd put it on repeat, and she'd spin until she got dizzy and fell laughing on the couch. The tears came freely now, running down her cheeks unchecked. When it came on today, I couldn't breathe. I saw her dancing. I heard her laugh, and then I remembered, she'll never dance again, never laugh again, never turn 9. The words poured out like poison she'd been holding in, toxic and necessary. Alberto listened to all of it. The funeral where she couldn't cry because the grief was too enormous. The child-sized casket, the empty apartment that still smelled like Sophia's strawberry shampoo, the lunchbox still sitting in the cabinet because Gina couldn't bear to move it. When Gina finally fell silent, exhausted by her own confession, Alberto reached into his jacket. He pulled out his wallet, extracted 5 crisp $100 bills, and placed them on the table between them. "Take the rest of the day off," he said quietly. "Go somewhere she loved. Remember her in joy, not just in pain." Gina stared at the money, her face shocked. "I can't accept this. You don't even know me. I shouldn't have. I lost someone too." Alberto stood, straightening his jacket. His voice carried an edge of something raw, something he usually kept buried. "I understand more than you know." He turned to leave, but Gina's voice stopped him. "Who?" Alberto looked back at her. This stranger who'd just handed him her grief like a gift, who sat in his booth with tear-stained cheeks and trembling hands, who'd loved her daughter enough that 5 months later a song could still break her. "My daughter," he said. "Francesca." She was 17. He walked away before Gina could respond, before he could say more, before the walls he'd spent 3 years building could crumble completely. Vincent fell into step beside him as they exited La Pergola, the afternoon sunlight harsh after the restaurant's amber dimness. Behind him, Alberto knew, Gina sat clutching $500 and wondering who the dangerous man with the soft eyes really was, wondering why he'd seen her pain when everyone else had pretended not to notice. And for the first time in 3 years, Alberto Zanardi felt something other than the vast, empty nothing that had become his existence. He felt seen. Chapter 2. 2 weeks passed before Alberto returned to La Pergola, and when he did, it was during the dinner service, not his usual afternoon slot. The hostess's eyes widened slightly when he walked through the door at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, Vincent trailing behind him like a well-dressed shadow. "Mr. Zanardi, welcome. We didn't have you in the reservation book." "That's fine. I'm sure you can accommodate me." It wasn't a question. Within moments, Antonio materialized from whatever back office he occupied, his professional smile firmly in place despite the surprise in his eyes. "Mr. Zanardi, of course. Your usual table." "Yes, and Antonio, I'd like Gina as my server if she's working tonight." Antonio's smile flickered microscopically. "She is. I'll inform her immediately." Alberto settled into his usual booth, the frosted glass partitions offering their familiar privacy. The dinner crowd was different from the lunch atmosphere. Younger couples, families celebrating occasions, the energy more animated. He'd chosen this time deliberately, though he wasn't entirely sure why. No, that was a lie. He knew exactly why. He'd thought about Gina Sanchez constantly for 2 weeks, about the way grief had made her shoulders shake, the raw honesty in her voice as she'd talked about Sophia, about the recognition he'd felt listening to her. Not pity, but something more fundamental, the understanding that came from walking the same dark roads. At night, when sleep evaded him and he stood in Francesca's preserved bedroom, he found himself wondering if Gina had visited Sophia's favorite park, if the money had helped, if she'd cried or laughed or felt anything other than the vast numbness that grief could bring. He'd almost come back a dozen times, almost sent Vincent to check on her, almost called Antonio to ask if she was managing, but each time he'd stopped himself. She was a stranger, a waitress. He had no business in her life beyond the momentary intersection of their shared pain, except he couldn't stop thinking about her. "Mr. Zanardi." He looked up. Gina stood at the edge of his booth, notepad in hand, her expression professional but her eyes wary. She looked better than she had 2 weeks ago. The haunted exhaustion had receded slightly, though grief still shadowed her features. "Gina," he nodded. "Thank you for serving me tonight." "Of course." She clicked her pen, not quite meeting his eyes. "Can I start you with a drink?" "Negroni. And Gina?" He waited until she looked at him. "How have you been?" "Since Sophia's birthday." Her hand tightened on the notepad. For a moment, he thought she might deflect, retreat into professional distance, but then her shoulders softened fractionally. "I took your advice, used the money to visit her favorite park, the one with the duck pond, bought flowers for her grave, sunflowers, they were her favorite." Gina's voice was quiet, meant only for him despite the restaurant's noise around them. It helped, being there, talking to her. Thank you. You didn't have to be so generous. Grief is expensive. Alberto's jaw tightened. Not in money, in everything else it costs us. Something passed between them recognition, understanding, the invisible thread that connected people who'd survived the unsurvivable. Gina's eyes glistened briefly before she blinked it away. I'll get your drink. She returned minutes later with his Negroni and took his dinner order, ossobuco, his usual. The meal passed in comfortable silence, with Gina checking on him periodically but giving him space. Alberto found himself watching her work, the practiced grace as she balanced trays, the genuine smile she gave other customers, the way exhaustion showed in the slight slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. He shouldn't care. He'd done his good deed, shown a moment of kindness to someone drowning in loss. That should have been enough. It wasn't. When Gina brought his dessert, tiramisu he hadn't ordered but she'd somehow known he'd want, he checked his watch. 9:45. Should be off soon. What time do you finish your shift? Gina's eyes widened slightly. 10 o'clock. But have dinner with me. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through. Not here. Somewhere quieter. She stared at him, and Alberto could see the war playing out across her face. Fear of him, of what he represented, of the power dynamics at play. But underneath that, something else. Curiosity, hope. The same desperate need for connection he felt gnawing at his own chest. I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Zanardi. Alberto. And why not? Because you're, she gestured vaguely, you, and I'm just a waitress who had a breakdown in front of you. I don't even know why you'd want. Because I understand your pain. Alberto's voice was low, intense. Because for 2 weeks I haven't been able to stop thinking about Sophia, about you, about what it means to carry that weight. Because Tuesday and Thursday nights I sit in my study with a glass of whiskey and Francesca's medical files, and I remember what it's like to watch someone you love slip away, and I thought maybe. He stopped, unsure how to finish. Maybe we could be less alone together? Gina supplied softly, yes. She looked down at her notepad, at the orders she'd scribbled throughout the night. When she looked back up, her eyes held a cautious vulnerability that made Alberto's chest constrict. There's a cafe, Rossi's, a few blocks from here. They stay open late. I know it. Midnight? I'll be there. Gina nodded and walked away, leaving Alberto with the strange sensation that something fundamental had just shifted. Vincent appeared at his elbow moments later. Boss, everything all right? Alberto sipped his espresso, watching Gina clear a table across the room. Yes, take the car. I'll get myself home tonight. Vincent's eyebrows rose. You sure? I'm sure. At midnight, Alberto walked into Rossi's cafe, a small, family-owned place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in empty wine bottles. It smelled like coffee and fresh bread, warm and unpretentious in a way that made La Pergola seem almost sterile in comparison. Gina was already there, sitting in a corner booth. She changed out of her work uniform into jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the armor of her professional persona, she looked younger, more fragile. Alberto had changed too, trading his three-piece suit for dark slacks and a simple button-down. Without Vincent looming nearby, without the weight of his reputation preceding him, he felt oddly exposed. You came, Gina said as he slid into the booth across from her. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. She wrapped her hands around a coffee mug. Part of me thought maybe you'd come to your senses. Realize this is strange, having midnight coffee with someone you barely know. Strange seems appropriate. Nothing about grief is normal. An older man appeared, presumably Mr. Rossi himself, and took their orders. More coffee, sandwiches neither of them would probably eat. When he left, silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people gathering courage. You said you lost someone too, Gina said finally. Your daughter, Francesca. Alberto's hands tightened around his cup. He'd started this. He'd asked her to be here. The least he could do was be honest. She was 15 when she was diagnosed. Glioblastoma, brain cancer. The words tasted like ash. The doctors gave her a year. She fought for 2. Died 3 years ago, 2 weeks after her 17th birthday. I'm so sorry. The hardest part wasn't watching her die. Alberto's voice was rough. It was watching her disappear piece by piece. The tumor took her memories first. She forgot our neighbor's name, then her favorite foods, then eventually couldn't remember what year it was. Her coordination went next. She loved to paint, spent hours creating these incredible sunsets with colors that didn't exist in nature. By the end, she couldn't hold a brush. Gina's eyes filled with tears. That's torture. Yes. Alberto met her gaze. But at least I got to say goodbye. I held her hand, told her I loved her. You didn't get that. No. Gina's voice broke. 1 minute Sophia was alive, probably singing that damn song and skipping home. The next minute, police at my door. They asked me to identify. She was wearing her favorite purple sneakers. I bought them for her a week earlier. They lit up when she walked. They talked until 2 in the morning, until Mr. Rossi gently reminded them he needed to close. They talked about the specific torture of grief, Sophia's empty chair at Gina's dinner table, Francesca's bedroom that Alberto kept exactly as she'd left it. The way time became elastic, 5 months or 3 years feeling simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. People say it gets easier, Alberto said as they stood to leave. They're wrong. You just get better at carrying it. Outside, the November air bit cold. Alberto walked Gina to her car in the small parking lot behind Rossi's. She unlocked it but didn't get in, standing in the cone of a streetlight with her arms wrapped around herself. Can we do this again? Alberto asked. Talk about them? Yes, and maybe, he hesitated, other things too. When you're ready. Gina studied his face in the dim light, and Alberto wondered what she saw. The dangerous man Antonio had probably warned her about, the Mafia boss whose reputation preceded him, or just someone as broken as she was, desperate for connection. Yes, she said finally, I'd like that. Alberto watched her taillights disappear into the night, Vincent pulling up moments later in the black SUV. His bodyguard took one look at his face and said nothing, which Alberto appreciated. Everything all right, boss? Alberto leaned his head back against the seat as Vincent drove. Yes, everything is different. In her small apartment across the city, Gina stood in front of Sophia's photograph on her nightstand. Her daughter grinned, gap-toothed at the camera, purple shirt bright against the park's green grass. I met someone who understands, baby girl, Gina whispered, touching the frame gently. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything. I think you'd want me to be happy again. Eventually. The photograph smiled back in the dim light, and for the first time in 5 months, Gina went to bed feeling something other than crushing loneliness. She felt hope. Small, fragile, terrifying, but hope nonetheless. Chapter 3. 3 weeks passed, and a pattern emerged with the quiet inevitability of seasons changing. Alberto Zanardi, a man whose schedule was dictated by shipments, meetings, and the careful orchestration of an empire, found himself rearranging his life around two specific days, Tuesday and Thursday. 9:30 in the evening, precisely when Gina's shift at La Pergola ended. He told himself it was convenience. The restaurant was centrally located, the food excellent, and he had business associates nearby. But the truth lived in the flutter of anticipation he felt each Tuesday morning, the way he checked his watch throughout Thursday afternoons, counting down hours until he could walk through those doors and see her. The restaurant staff noticed. Of course they noticed. Alberto Zanatti didn't do predictable, and he certainly didn't time his arrivals around the schedule of a waitress. Antonio said nothing directly, but his knowing look spoke volumes. On the third Tuesday, as Gina cleared the last of her tables and Alberto waited in his usual booth, Antonio appeared with an espresso Alberto hadn't ordered. She's a good woman, the manager said quietly, setting down the cup. Been through hell, works harder than anyone on my staff. I'm aware. Just be careful, Mr. Zanardi. For both your sakes. Antonio walked away before Alberto could respond, leaving him to contemplate the warning. Be careful. As if careful was possible when grief had already stripped away every defense. As if he could protect either of them from the simple, dangerous truth, he was falling for Gina Sanchez, and careful had nothing to do with it. That night, they went to a Vietnamese restaurant Gina loved, a tiny place in a strip mall with plastic chairs and the best pho Alberto had ever tasted. She'd been nervous suggesting it, worried it wasn't upscale enough for a man who wore custom suits and traveled with armed bodyguards. I don't care about fancy, Alberto had told her. I care about good. Now, watching her slurp noodles with unself-conscious pleasure, chopsticks moving with practiced ease, he realized how much he'd missed this. Not the food, the casualness of it. The way Gina laughed when broth splashed her chin, the way she insisted he try the spring rolls even though he claimed not to be hungry. Tell me about Sophia, he said, after their bowls were half empty and the conversation had found its comfortable rhythm. Her personality? Was she shy? Outgoing? Gina's face transformed, the way it always did when she talked about her daughter, pain and joy mixing into something bittersweet but beautiful. Fearless, she said, smiling. That girl would talk to anyone, made friends everywhere. The grocery store, the park, the bus. Once, when she was 6, she convinced a businessman on the subway to play tic-tac-toe with her on his newspaper. He missed his stop because they were having so much fun. Her voice caught. She had this way of seeing good in everyone. Never met a stranger. Alberto thought of his own daughter. The opposite in so many ways. Francesca was introverted, quiet. She found comfort in her art, said colors spoke louder than words ever could. She'd spend hours in her room with her paints, emerging with these incredible canvases. Sunsets that looked like they were on fire, oceans that seemed to move. Do you still have them, her paintings? Every single one. Her room is exactly as she left it. The last painting still on the easel. She was working on it the week before she died. A garden at sunrise. She never finished it. Gina reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch was warm, solid, real. Maybe that's okay. Maybe some things aren't meant to be finished. They stayed until closing, then walked through the night market that operated on the adjacent street. Vendors selling everything from knockoff handbags to fresh produce, the air thick with the scent of grilled meat and incense. Alberto had Vincent following at a discreet distance, but for the first time in years, he barely noticed his bodyguard's presence. He was too focused on Gina, on the way she examined cheap jewelry with the same attention someone might give to diamonds, on her laugh when a vendor tried to sell Alberto a Hello Kitty phone case. For your daughter, the vendor insisted. All girls love Hello Kitty. The words froze both of them. Gina's smile faltered, and Alberto felt the familiar clench in his chest. But before he could respond, Gina squeezed his hand. Different daughters, she told the vendor gently. But thank you. They moved on, and Alberto realized she was still holding his hand. Neither of them mentioned it. Near the end of the market, Gina stumbled on uneven pavement. Alberto's reaction was instinctive. His arm shot out, catching her waist, steadying her against him. For a moment, they stood pressed together, her hands braced against his chest, his arm around her. I've got you, he said quietly. Gina looked up at him, and in the glow of the market string lights, Alberto saw something shift in her expression. Awareness, the recognition that this, whatever this was, had moved beyond grief counseling, beyond two strangers sharing loss. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. When they finally separated, the air between them felt charged, different. Thursday brought them to a Greek taverna with live music and plates meant for sharing. They talked about the practical horrors of grief that nobody warned you about. Closing bank accounts, boxing up clothes, the bureaucratic nightmare of death certificates and insurance claims. I still pay Francesca's phone bill, Alberto admitted, twirling his wine glass. It's been 3 years. The account is still active. I call it sometimes just to hear her voicemail. Hey, it's Franca. Leave me a message and I'll call you back when I'm not painting. She sounds so alive. Gina's eyes filled with tears. I do the same thing. Sophia's voicemail is her singing that song. You are the reason. She recorded it when she was 7, thought it was hilarious. I used to tease her about it. Now I call her number twice a week just to hear her voice. Do you think we're crazy? Probably, but I'd rather be crazy than forget what they sounded like. Alberto raised his glass. To being crazy, then. Gina clinked hers against his, to remembering. The music shifted to something faster, couples taking to the small dance floor. Alberto watched them with detachment, remembering when he used to dance with his wife at functions, before the marriage had deteriorated into cold politeness, before Francesca got sick and everything else became secondary. Did Sophia like to dance? He asked. Loved it. She'd make up these elaborate routines in our living room, insist I watch every single one. She wanted to take ballet, but I couldn't afford lessons. I kept saying, next year, and then, don't. Alberto's voice was firm. That way lies madness. I've walked that road. Every what if, every if only. You could drive yourself insane with the things you didn't do, the moments you can't get back. How do you stop? You don't stop. You just learn to carry it differently. The second Tuesday, they went to a rooftop bar overlooking the city. The conversation shifted that night, moving away from grief and toward the people they'd been before loss had redefined them. Gina told him about growing up in Mexico, immigrating at 12, the confusion of learning English and navigating a new culture, about working 3 jobs to put herself through community college, about getting pregnant at 23 and deciding to keep the baby even though Sophia's father wanted nothing to do with them. I was terrified, she admitted, city lights reflecting in her eyes. But the minute they put her in my arms, I knew this was what I was meant to do. Be her mother. Alberto talked about his own childhood, the son of a man who'd built an empire through violence and cunning, expected to inherit both the private schools, the etiquette lessons, the gradual understanding that his future had been decided before he was born. I thought about leaving, he said, surprising himself with the admission. When I was 18, had a scholarship to study business legitimately. My father made it clear what that choice would cost me. My family, my name, everything, so I stayed. Do you regret it? Alberto considered the question, really considered it. I regret many things, but staying gave me Francesca. So now, the cost was worth what I got. Gina leaned forward, her expression serious. I need you to be honest with me, Alberto, about who you are, what you do, why, because I'm starting to care about you, and I need to know what I'm walking into. Alberto felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was the moment, the test he'd been waiting for. He could lie, soften the truth, present himself as something more palatable. But Gina deserved better than lies. I'm not a good man, Gina. I've done things that would horrify you, hurt people, made decisions that traded morality for profit. The empire my father built, I've expanded it, made it more efficient, more ruthless. I tell myself there are rules, lines I don't cross. But I've crossed enough lines that I stopped counting them years ago. He waited for her to recoil, to make excuses and leave. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand. I don't need you to be perfect, Alberto. I need you to be honest. Something in his chest cracked open. The second Thursday, they returned to Rossi's cafe. It had become their place, familiar and comfortable in a world that felt increasingly unstable. Alberto brought something he'd never shown anyone outside his immediate family, a photograph of Francesca in a small frame. His hands shook slightly as he placed it on the table between them. Francesca in her hospital bed, bald from chemotherapy but grinning at the camera, holding up a finished painting, one of her sunset pieces, all oranges and purples and impossible beauty. Gina picked up the frame with reverent gentleness, tears streaming down her face before she'd even looked at it properly. She was beautiful, Gina whispered. She had your eyes. And that smile, Alberto, that smile could light up the world. She painted that the day before she went into hospice care. Knew it might be her last one. She gave it to me, said, remember that sunsets always come back, Papa, even when it gets dark. Gina couldn't speak. She just held the photograph, crying silently, and Alberto understood. Grief recognized grief. Beauty recognized beauty. Loss recognized loss. Can I show you something? Gina pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she scrolled through photos. I don't show people these, it hurts too much. But I want you to see her, really see her. She turned the phone toward him, and Alberto felt his breath catch. Sophia at a birthday party, face covered in chocolate cake, grinning with gap-toothed abandon. Sophia's first day of school, backpack almost bigger than she was, giving the camera a thumbs up. Sophia at the park, chasing ducks, mid-laugh with pure joy radiating from every pixel. They spent 2 hours like that, trading photographs and stories. Alberto told her about Francesca's obsession with sunflowers, how she'd insisted on growing them in their garden even though the soil was wrong. Gina described Sophia's hatred of vegetables, how she'd try to hide broccoli in her napkin when she thought Gina wasn't looking. She sounds perfect, Alberto said. She was mine, Gina replied simply. That made her perfect. On the third Tuesday, they walked through a night market after dinner, and something shifted. Alberto caught Gina's arm when she stumbled on uneven pavement, and the touch lingered. His hand slid from her elbow to her hand, fingers intertwining naturally. Neither of them pulled away. They walked like that for 20 minutes, hands clasped, not speaking, just existing together in the comfortable silence of two people who'd stopped fighting what was growing between them. The third Thursday arrived, and Alberto found himself in his car outside Gina's apartment building at 11:30 at night. They'd talked for hours again, the time slipping away unnoticed until Gina had yawned and checked her watch in surprise. Now she sat in his passenger seat, neither of them making a move to leave, the engine off and windows fogging from their breath in the cold night air. "What are we doing, Alberto?" Gina asked finally, her voice small in the darkness. Alberto stared at his hands on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I only know that Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days I remember how to breathe." "Me too." She turned to face him. "But I'm scared. Of me? Of what I do?" "No." Her voice cracked. "Of this. Of feeling something again. Of betraying her memory by being happy." Alberto's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers threading together with practiced ease now. "Franca told me something, near the end. She was having a good day, lucid and herself. She said, 'Don't stop living, Papa. Promise me you won't stop living.' I promised her. But I broke that promise the day she died." Gina squeezed his hand. "Sophia used to say something similar when she'd get sick, just colds, normal kid stuff. She'd pat my face and say, 'Don't be sad, Mama. I'll be better soon.' She never got better." They sat in silence, hands clasped, breathing in sync. Outside, the city continued its late night rhythm, but inside the car felt like a separate world, a place where grief and hope could coexist, where two broken people could find something like peace. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," Alberto said finally. "We just have to decide about Tuesday." Gina looked at him, really looked at him, and Alberto felt the weight of her gaze examining every part of him, the dangerous parts, the broken parts, the parts that still remembered how to feel. "Same time?" she asked. "Same time." Alberto walked her to her door for the first time, his hand never leaving the small of her back. At her doorstep, they stood close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something floral and simple. Her eyes held questions neither of them was ready to ask. He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Sleep well, Gina." Then he kissed her forehead, tender, careful, reverent, a promise and a question all at once. As he walked away, Alberto heard her door close softly. He climbed into his car, Vincent materializing from wherever he'd been keeping watch, and drove through the city streets with something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Hope. Terrifying, fragile, impossible hope. In her apartment, Gina pressed her fingers to her forehead where Alberto's lips had been, feeling the ghost of his touch. She walked to her bedroom, to the photograph of Sophia on her nightstand, her daughter's gap-toothed smile forever frozen at 8 years old. "Is it okay if I'm a little bit happy?" Gina whispered to the photograph. In the dim light of her bedside lamp, Sophia's smile seemed to brighten, and Gina chose to believe that was answer enough. Chapter 4. Saturday afternoon sun poured through Gina's apartment windows as she stood in front of her closet, trying to remember the last time she'd been on what could genuinely be called a date. Before Sophia, probably, back when she was young enough to believe that love stories had happy endings. Her phone buzzed on the bed. Alberto's name lit up the screen. "Picking you up at 6." "Wear something comfortable." "And Gina, this is a proper date." She smiled despite her nerves, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing back. "How proper are we talking? Proper enough that I'm bringing flowers, not so proper that you need to worry." The flowers, when Alberto arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, were sunflowers. A dozen of them, bright and impossible and perfect. Gina opened her door to find him standing there in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look almost black, holding the bouquet like an offering. "Sunflowers," she breathed, taking them carefully. "Sophia's favorite." "How did you—" "You told me 3 weeks ago at the Vietnamese restaurant. You said she loved them because they were happy flowers." Gina felt tears prick her eyes. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." She invited him in while she found a vase, hyper aware of him in her small space, this man who commanded rooms and inspired fear, standing in her modest apartment with its secondhand furniture and photographs of Sophia covering every surface. If he judged, it didn't show on his face. Instead, he studied the photographs with quiet intensity. "She had your smile," he said, pausing at a picture of Sophia at the beach, face scrunched against the sun. "Everyone said that. I never saw it." Gina arranged the sunflowers, their bright faces already transforming her kitchen. "Where are we going? Somewhere special. Trust me." She did. That was the terrifying part. She trusted this man whose world was built on violence and secrets, who'd shown her nothing but gentleness and understanding. She trusted him in a way that defied logic. The drive took 30 minutes north of the city, the urban landscape gradually giving way to rolling hills and scattered estates. Alberto drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console close enough that Gina could feel its warmth without touching. "I've reserved the entire terrace section of a restaurant on the water," he said. "No other diners, just us, good food and privacy. I thought you might prefer that to dealing with crowds." "You reserved an entire section? I wanted you to be comfortable, to not have to worry about people watching or judging or asking questions." He glanced at her. "If it's too much, say so. I can be excessive sometimes. It's not too much, it's thoughtful." She reached over, letting her hand settle over his on the console. "Thank you." The restaurant perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, all glass and weathered wood with waves crashing against rocks far below. True to his word, the terrace was empty except for their table. Candles already lit, wine breathing, the setting sun painting everything gold. "Alberto," Gina whispered as they were seated, "this is beautiful. You deserve beautiful." He said it simply, like it was fact rather than opinion. Dinner was unhurried, the kind of meal where courses arrived with perfect timing and conversation flowed like the wine in their glasses. But tonight felt different from their Tuesday and Thursday meetings. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it shared space with something new. "Possibility. Tell me something," Alberto said over their main course. "Before everything. Before Sofia. Before single motherhood and tragedy. What did you dream about?" Gina set down her fork, the question catching her off guard. "I wanted to open a bakery. Nothing fancy, just a small place where people could get good bread and pastries. My grandmother taught me to bake when I was little in Mexico. It was one of the few things that made sense after we moved here." She smiled sadly. "Sophia used to help me practice recipes. We'd make cupcakes every Sunday, try new flavor combinations. She was my taste tester. What's stopping you from opening the bakery?" "Reality, money I don't have, time I don't have, the fear of failing at something else." She laughed bitterly. "Take your pick." Alberto leaned forward, his expression intense. "What if those weren't obstacles?" Gina's heart stuttered. "Alberto!" "I'm not offering to buy you a bakery if that's what you're thinking. I know you well enough to know you'd refuse. But money can be loaned, business plans can be developed, fears can be faced. The question is, do you still want it? Did she?" Gina turned the question over in her mind, trying to separate what she'd wanted from what she thought she should want now, in the after. The truth surprised her. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think I do. Sophia always said I should do it. 'Mama, you make the best cookies in the whole world. Everyone should get to eat them,' I told her someday. There was always going to be a someday." "Then we'll work on making someday happen. Not me writing a check. You doing the work, me helping with the parts where I have expertise." "Business plans, suppliers, permits." He caught her eye. "Partners, if you want." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing all this? You barely know me." Alberto was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening ocean. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of truth that cost something to speak. "Because after Franca died, I stopped living. I went through motions, ran my business, maintained appearances, survived. But I was a ghost in my own life. Then I saw you crying behind that glass partition, and something cracked open. You made me feel again, made me remember that life happens in the moments between tragedy." He looked at her. "I'm not doing this out of pity or obligation. I'm doing this because I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." The words landed between them like stones dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward to touch everything. Gina's breath caught in her throat, her heart suddenly too large for her chest. "I thought that part of me died with Sophia," she whispered. "The part that could love someone new, that wanted to be loved. And now I'm sitting here with you and I feel alive. Tuesday and Thursday aren't enough anymore. I want Wednesday and Friday and all the days in between. You make me feel alive, Alberto." He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her want to weep. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Can I kiss you? His voice was rough, uncertain, in a way she'd never heard from him before. Gina nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer, a promise and a confession. Salt touched from the tears running down both their faces, careful in the way of two people who'd been broken and were terrified of shattering each other. Alberto's hands trembled against her face, and Gina's fingers clutched at his sweater, both of them anchoring to something real and present and possible. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air, Gina felt something shift in her chest. Not the erasure of grief that would never leave, but beside the grief, making room, was joy. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. I don't know how to do this, how to love someone again. Neither do I. But I'd like to figure it out with you. They stayed on the terrace until the stars came out, talking and kissing and planning a future that felt simultaneously fragile and inevitable. Alberto told her about Francesca's dream that he should find someone, how his daughter had made him promise not to stay alone. Gina confessed that Sophia had once asked her why she didn't have a special friend like other kids' moms, had wanted her mother to be happy. They'd like each other, Gina said, looking at the stars. Sophia and Francesca. They'd be friends. Franca would have loved her fearlessness, would have painted her portrait, probably covered in sunflowers. The drive back to the city was quiet, comfortable, Alberto's hand entwined with hers over the console. But as they crossed back into urban sprawl, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. His jaw tightened as he glanced at the screen. I need to take this. I'm sorry. He pulled over into a parking lot, and Gina watched his expression transform as he answered the call. Gone was the gentle man who'd kissed her on the terrace. In his place sat someone colder, harder, dangerous. When? A pause. How bad? Another pause, and his knuckles went white around the phone. I'm on my way. Get everyone to the warehouse. Now. He ended the call and sat motionless for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. When he turned to Gina, she saw the war playing out across his features. The man he was with, her fighting against the man his world demanded he be. I have to go. Business emergency. Vincent is 10 minutes out. He'll take you home. What happened? Nothing you need to worry about. He was already pulling back onto the road, driving faster now. I'll have you home in 5 minutes. Alberto, talk to me. I can't. The words came out harsh, and he immediately softened his tone. Please, Gina, I need to handle this. They pulled up to her building in silence. A black SUV was already waiting, Vincent in the driver's seat. Alberto kissed her quickly, distracted, already somewhere else in his mind. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Then he was gone, and Gina was left standing on the sidewalk watching taillights disappear, the ghost of their perfect evening already fading. Wednesday came. No call. Thursday arrived. Their day, their routine. Gina worked her shift at La Pergola, glancing at the entrance every time the door opened. 9:30 came and went. 10 o'clock, 11. The restaurant emptied, and still no Alberto. Antonio approached as she was finishing her closing duties, his expression sympathetic. Go home, Gina. Get some rest. Has he called? Sent word? No, but I'm sure there's an explanation. Gina nodded numbly, gathering her things. Outside, she found Vincent leaning against his SUV. Mr. Zanardi asked me to make sure you got home safely, he said. Is he all right? Vincent's expression gave nothing away. He's handling business, miss. That's all I can say. Friday morning brought a text message. I'm sorry. Are you working tonight? Gina stared at the words, anger and relief warring in her chest. Yes. Table 7, 8 p.m. She served him professionally that evening, her movements efficient but her hands trembling. Alberto looked exhausted, and there was a cut healing on his jaw that hadn't been there Saturday. His eyes followed her throughout the meal, but she kept her distance until she brought his dessert. Can we talk after? He asked quietly. She nodded curtly and walked away. An hour later, they sat in his car in La Pergola's parking lot, the engine off and silence heavy between them. Up close, Gina could see the toll the past week had taken. Shadows under his eyes, tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. What happened? She asked finally. There was a betrayal within my organization. Someone I trusted. Something I had to handle personally. His voice was flat, carefully neutral. It's dealt with now. That cut on your face. Were you hurt? It's nothing. It doesn't look like nothing. Alberto turned to face her, and Gina saw something raw in his expression. This is what I was afraid of. The moment you see the darkness I bring with me. I don't want to bring that into your life, Gina. You've had enough darkness. Anger flared hot in her chest. Don't I get a choice in this? You don't understand. Don't I? Her voice rose despite her best efforts. You think I don't know who you are? What you do? I'm not naive, Alberto. I've known since the beginning what world you live in. But I chose to see past that, to see the man underneath, the father who lost his daughter, the person who understood my grief when no one else could. Don't take away my choice now. You should run. His voice cracked, far and fast, away from me and everything I touch. Is that what you want? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Finally, Alberto spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. No, God help me, no. I want you in my life. I want Tuesday and Thursday and every day in between. I want to wake up and know I'll see you. I want to help you build your bakery. I want. He stopped, swallowing hard. I want everything, and that terrifies me because everything can be lost. Gina reached over, taking his hand in both of hers. Life doesn't come with guarantees. I lost Sophia walking home from school on an ordinary Tuesday, the safest, most normal thing in the world. Nowhere is truly safe, Alberto. But I'd rather live fully with you than half alive without you. What if I can't protect you? What if my world touches you and... She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Then we'll face it together. But don't push me away because you're scared. I'm scared too, of loving again, of losing again, of all of it. But I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Alberto pulled her close, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking, felt the dampness of tears against her neck, and held him through it. Two broken people clinging to each other in the darkness of a parking lot, choosing hope despite every reason not to. There's something I need to show you, Alberto said eventually, pulling back to look at her. Tomorrow. Saturday? Will you come with me? Where? Somewhere I've never taken anyone, somewhere that matters. Gina studied his face, the vulnerability there, the fear, the desperate hope. Yes, I'll come. That night, alone in her apartment with Sophia's photograph watching from the nightstand, Gina whispered into the darkness, Am I making the right choice, baby girl? The apartment was silent. But in that silence, Gina felt something. A warmth, a presence, a sense of permission that might have been imagination or might have been something more. She chose to believe it was blessing. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, she had chosen love. Despite the fear, despite the grief, despite everything that said it was too soon or too dangerous or too much, she had chosen love. And that felt like the bravest thing she'd done since the day she buried her daughter. Chapter 5. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real. Gina stood at her window watching for Alberto's car, her reflection ghosted in the glass. A woman caught between grief and hope, past and future, fear and courage. When the black sedan pulled up, she grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs before she could second-guess herself. Alberto stood beside the passenger door, dressed casually in jeans and a dark sweater, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft when he saw her. Thank you for coming, he said, opening the door for her. You said it was somewhere important. It is. The most important place in my world. They drove north out of the city, conversation sparse but comfortable. Alberto's hand found hers naturally, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of people who'd learned each other's touch. Gina watched the urban landscape give way to suburbs, then to rural roads lined with autumn trees dropping their leaves like copper coins. 40 minutes later, Alberto turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet stone marker. The road wound through carefully maintained woodland until it opened onto a clearing that stole Gina's breath. A garden stretched before them, acres of cultivated beauty with walking paths winding through flower beds and ornamental trees. In the center stood a pavilion of glass and white stone, elegant and somehow ethereal in the afternoon light. The entire space radiated peace, a sanctuary carved from the chaos of the world. Alberto, Gina breathed. What is this place? It's Francesca's. His voice was thick with emotion. After she died, I couldn't bear the thought of a traditional grave. She loved gardens, loved being surrounded by growing things. So I built this, her memorial. He parted and came around to open her door, his hand trembling slightly as he helped her out. Together they walked the stone path toward the pavilion, and with each step, Gina felt the weight of what Alberto was sharing with her. This wasn't just a place, it was his heart, exposed and vulnerable. Inside the pavilion, Gina's breath caught. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying Francesca's artwork, canvas after canvas of impossible sunsets, oceans that seemed to breathe, gardens exploding with colors that shouldn't exist but somehow did. In the center, on a marble pedestal, sat an urn of exquisite beauty, cream porcelain inlaid with gold leaf in the pattern of sunflowers. "This is where I come every week," Alberto said quietly. "Sometimes more often, when the weight gets too heavy, I sit here and talk to her. Tell her about my week, about decisions I'm struggling with, about—" He paused. "About you." Gina's eyes filled with tears. "You told her about me?" "Every visit for the past month. I told her I'd met someone who understood loss, someone who made me feel alive again, someone I was falling in love with." He turned to face her fully. "You're the first person I've brought here, Gina. The only person outside my immediate family who knows this place exists." The magnitude of that trust settled over Gina like a blanket. She moved slowly through the pavilion, studying each painting with reverent attention. In every brushstroke she could see Francesca, vibrant, passionate, unafraid of color or emotion. A girl who'd painted beauty even as her own life was being stolen away. "She was extraordinary," Gina whispered, stopping in front of a particularly stunning sunset piece, all purples and oranges and pinks that seemed to glow from within. She painted that one 3 weeks before she died. Her hands were already shaking. You can see it in some of the details. But she refused to give up. Alberto moved to stand beside her. "She told me, 'The world needs beauty, Papa, especially when things are dark. Maybe especially then.'" They sat together on the bench inside the pavilion, surrounded by Francesca's art, the afternoon sun streaming through the glass ceiling and painting everything gold. Alberto talked about his daughter's final days, the conversations they'd had about death and legacy, the way she'd tried to comfort him even as she was dying. "Her last words to me," Alberto said, his voice breaking, were, 'Take care of yourself, Papa. Find someone who makes you laugh again. Promise me you won't stop living.'" He wiped his eyes roughly. "I promised her. But the day she died, I broke that promise. I existed, but I didn't live. Not until you." Gina leaned her head against his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Sophia asked me something similar, but not about death. She was only 8. She didn't know she was going to die. She asked why I didn't have a special friends like other kids' moms. She wanted me to be happy, to have someone to dance with in the kitchen." Her voice cracked. "I told her someday. There was always going to be a someday." "We got our somedays," Alberto said softly, "just not the ones we expected." They sat in silence for a long time, holding each other, letting the afternoon stretch around them like a benediction. Finally, Alberto spoke again. "Franca made me promise I'd scatter some of her ashes somewhere beautiful. Not all of them, I couldn't bear that. But enough that part of her could be somewhere she'd never been, see something she'd never seen." He gestured toward the urn. "I haven't been able to do it." It felt like letting go, like losing her all over again. Gina lifted her head to look at him. "Maybe we could do it together, when you're ready. Not now. I know it's too soon. But someday, when it feels right. Would you do that? Help me?" "Of course." She took his hand. "You help me remember how to breathe." "Let me help you let go, just a little." Alberto pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks. Finally her lips, tender and grateful and full of an emotion too large for words. When they pulled apart, he stood and offered his hand. "Come with me. There's something else I need to show you." He drove her across the city to Riverton Park, the place where Sophia had spent her last afternoon alive. Gina's chest tightened as they pulled into the familiar parking lot, as they walked the paths she'd walked 1,000 times since that terrible day. "You said Sophia was feeding ducks," Alberto said gently as they approached the pond. "Right there." Gina pointed to a spot near the water's edge. "She was so happy. It was getting dark, and I called to tell her to come home." She wanted 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes, her voice broke. "I said no. I told her it was time to come home. If I'd just said yes, don't." Alberto's hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Don't do that to yourself. I've walked that road, every what if, every if only. If Franca had gone to a different hospital, if we'd caught it earlier, if I'd spent more time with her instead of working. It's a spiral with no bottom, Gina. You can't live there. How do you stop? You don't stop. You just learn to carry it differently. And having someone to carry it with, that helps. He led her to a bench near the water, a memorial bench Gina had commissioned 3 months after Sophia died, a simple wooden bench with a brass plaque in memory of Sophia Sanchez, forever ate, forever loved. They sat together as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in colors that Francesca might have painted, while ducks paddled across water that Sophia had loved. Two parents who'd lost everything, finding something like peace in the place where their children's spirits lingered. I want to try this, Gina said finally, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Us! Really try. Not just Tuesday and Thursday, not just stolen moments between grief and work. I want to build something real with you. It won't be easy. My life is complicated in ways I can't always control. I don't need easy. I need real. Alberto turned to face her fully, his expression grave. Then I need you to understand something. In my world, there are rules. If you're with me, truly with me, you become important. That means you become protected, but it also means you could become a target. People who want to hurt me might try to hurt you. The words should have terrified her. Maybe they would have, a year ago. But grief had burned away Gina's capacity for that kind of fear. She'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to her. I understand. Vincent will be assigned to you, discreetly, when you're alone, just to keep you safe. I need you to accept this, Gina. It's non-negotiable. She wanted to protest. She'd been taking care of herself for years, didn't need a bodyguard, didn't need protection. But looking at Alberto's face, seeing the barely controlled terror there, the desperate need to keep her safe, she understood. This wasn't about control, it was about love. Yes, she said, I can accept that. The relief in his expression was palpable. He pulled her close, and they sat watching the sunset over the pond where Sophia had spent her last happy moments, holding each other while the sky turned purple and gold. They'd be happy for us, Alberto whispered. Both of them. I know, Gina replied, surprised to find she meant it. I can feel them smiling. 1 month later. Life developed a new rhythm, one that incorporated both grief and joy in measures that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Alberto came to La Pergola not just on Tuesday and Thursday, but whenever he could steal time away from his business. Sometimes Gina visited his home, a surprising space filled with books and warm lighting, and Francesca's artwork displayed on every wall. They celebrated Francesca's birthday together, bringing flowers to the garden pavilion and talking about what she would have been at 20, the art she might have created, the woman she might have become. They visited Sophia's memorial bench together, Alberto bringing sunflowers and listening, while Gina told stories about her daughter's fearlessness, her gap-toothed smile, her terrible singing voice that Gina would give anything to hear again. The grief didn't disappear. It never would. But it transformed, became something they carried together rather than alone, something that connected them rather than isolated them. Alberto kept his promise about the bakery. Not by writing checks, but by teaching Gina about business plans and profit margins, by connecting her with suppliers who owed him favors, by sitting at her tiny kitchen table until midnight, helping her calculate costs and dream about possibilities. I want to call it Sophia's sunrise, Gina said one night, 3 weeks into their planning. She loved mornings. Used to wake me up too early on weekends, dragging me to the window to watch the sky change colors. It's perfect. Alberto pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos until he found what he was looking for. Franca painted this. She called it dawn-breaking. I'd like to donate it to your bakery. Let our daughters be together in this new thing you're building. The painting showed a sunrise over water, all soft pinks and golds, and the promise of new beginnings. Gina pressed her hand to her mouth, unable to speak through her tears. She'd love that, she managed finally. They'd both love that. 3 months after their first kiss. Opening day of Sophia's sunrise dawned clear and bright, the kind of morning that felt like a gift. Gina arrived at 5 a.m. to start the ovens, her hands trembling with nerves and excitement and disbelief that this was actually happening. The bakery was small, just a storefront in a modest neighborhood, but it was hers. Cream-colored walls lined with photographs of Sofia, Francesca's sunrise painting displayed prominently behind the counter, display cases waiting to be filled with the pastries Gina had been perfecting for months. Alberto arrived at 5:30 with coffee and encouragement, rolling up his sleeves to help prep even though he had no idea what he was doing. Vincent stood guard outside, keeping watch in the pre-dawn darkness. By 7 a.m., when they unlocked the doors for the first time, the display cases were filled with conchas and croissants, cinnamon rolls and sourdough loaves, all the recipes Gina and Sophia had practiced together on Sunday mornings. The first customer was an elderly woman who claimed she'd been walking past and smelled the bread. The second was a construction worker stopping before his shift. By 8 a.m., there was a line out the door. Word had spread about the quality of the pastries, yes, but also about the story. The single mother who'd lost her daughter and somehow found the strength to build something beautiful from her grief. People came for the bread and stayed for the warmth, for the photographs on the walls, for the sense that this small bakery was about more than just food. By noon, half the inventory was gone. By 2 p.m., Gina was frantically baking more. By closing time at 6, she was exhausted and elated and couldn't stop smiling. Alberto had stayed all day, helping where he could, watching Gina in her element with something like wonder in his eyes. When she finally locked the door and collapsed into a chair, he knelt beside her. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it." She cupped his face in her flour-dusted hands. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm grateful I got to be part of it." He sat at a corner table while Gina cleaned up, and she caught him looking at Francesca's painting on the wall. His expression was soft, peaceful in a way she rarely saw. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I found her. The one Franca told me about. The one who makes me laugh again." He pulled out his wallet, extracting 2 photographs. One of Francesca in her hospital bed, grinning despite everything, and one of Sophia that Gina had given him weeks ago. "I carry them both now. Our daughters. The reason we found each other." Gina moved to sit beside him, looking at the photographs. 2 girls who'd never meet, but who'd somehow brought their broken parents together. 2 lights that had gone out too soon, but had left enough warmth behind to guide 2 people out of darkness. "Do you think they know?" she asked. "Somehow? That we found each other? I choose to believe they do. I choose to believe they orchestrated this whole thing. Francesca whispering in my ear to go to La Pergola that day, Sophia making sure that song played, both of them pushing us together because they wanted us to be happy. That's a beautiful thought. It's the only thought that makes sense." He kissed her temple. "2 people as broken as we were shouldn't have been able to build something this good. We had help from the best people we ever knew." Epilogue. 1 year later. The apartment was chaos, boxes everywhere, half-packed and overflowing, a year's worth of Gina's life being condensed and relocated. She was moving into Alberto's home, taking the step they'd both been circling around for months. In the midst of the chaos, Gina found Sophia's old music player, the cheap pink device her daughter had used constantly, loaded with endless repetitions of the same song. On impulse, Gina plugged it in, pressed play, and let the opening notes of "You Are the Reason" fill the apartment. She froze, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come, not the crushing, breathless agony of early grief. Instead, she felt something gentler, bittersweet recognition, memory without devastation. Alberto appeared in the doorway, having arrived to help with the heavy lifting. His expression shifted when he heard the song, the one that had brought them together, the one that had been playing when he'd first seen Gina crying behind frosted glass. "That song," he said softly, "I can listen to it now." Gina smiled through the tears that came anyway, happy tears, grateful tears, tears that acknowledged loss while celebrating survival. "It reminds me of the day we met, the day you were crying behind the glass, the day you saw my pain and didn't look away." She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "The day everything changed." Alberto held her as the song played, both of them swaying slightly to the rhythm. "I'd climb every mountain and swim every ocean just to be with you and fix what I have broken. Some things break beyond repair." Gina murmured against his chest. But sometimes, Alberto replied, two broken things can build something beautiful together. The music swelled around them. Sophia's favorite song, the soundtrack to a little girl's dancing and a mother's grief, and two people finding each other in the aftermath of loss. Gina closed her eyes and let herself feel it all, the pain of what she'd lost, the joy of what she'd found, the impossible truth that both could exist simultaneously. When the song ended, they stood together in the silence that followed, still swaying slightly, neither wanting to let go. Are you ready? Alberto asked eventually. To leave this place? Start the next chapter? Gina looked around the apartment, at Sophia's photographs still lining the walls, at the boxes containing a life she'd built alone, at the space where she'd been a mother and then had learned to be something else. So much had happened in these rooms. So much had been lost and found and transformed. Yes, she said finally, I'm ready. Sophia's coming with us, her photographs, her memory, everything she was. But it's time for something new. Frank is coming too. Her paintings, her ashes, all of it. We're not leaving them behind. We're bringing them forward. A family, Gina said wonderingly. All four of us. All four of us, Alberto agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon packing, sharing stories as they worked, Alberto telling her about Francesca's obsession with a particular shade of purple, Gina describing Sophia's hatred of bedtime and her elaborate stalling tactics. They laughed and cried and packed away pieces of the past while building something new. As sunset painted the apartment in shades of gold, Gina stood at the window one last time, looking at the view she'd memorized over years of grief and healing. Behind her, she felt Alberto's presence, solid and real. In her pocket, she carried a photograph of Sofia. In her heart, she carried everything her daughter had been. Thank you, baby girl, she whispered to the fading light, for pushing me toward him, for wanting me to be happy, for loving me enough to let me love again. The apartment was silent, but Gina felt a warmth settle over her, the same sensation she'd felt before, the one she chose to interpret as blessing and permission, and love that transcended death. Alberto's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of two people who'd learned to be each other's anchor. Ready to go home? He asked. Gina turned away from the window, from the past, toward the man who'd helped her remember how to breathe, how to hope, how to build beauty from devastation. Yes, she said, let's go home. And as they walked out together, carrying boxes and memories and the weight of the love they'd lost and found, the setting sun painted everything in colors that Francesca might have painted, purples and golds, and the impossible beauty of endings that were also beginnings. Two broken people had found each other behind frosted glass, had built something imperfect and real and achingly beautiful, had learned that grief never truly leaves, but love, persistent, patient love, can grow even in soil saturated with loss. They'd climbed their mountains, swum their oceans, found each other on the other side of devastation. And in the spaces between grief and joy, in the moments when memory and hope existed simultaneously, they built a life worth living. Together,